Today, we will talk about XLM and expand upon my first video in this series, explaining how Stellar and the UN, World Bank, IMF, World Economic Forum, BIS, and IBM have already created and rolled out the public-facing infrastructure of the quantum financial system that will run on Stellar and XLM. It also ties in a lot of XRP and SHX because they're all connected into the exact same people and entities. And in the next piece of content, I will explain more on IBM and the technical infrastructure ties, particularly around WorldWire and the Hyperledger fabric that includes things like Casper, Quant, HBAR, and a lot of XDC. And today I will prove that there is an entity out there that was a test in 2021 put together by the UN with a lot of highly connected individuals that tie back into Swift as well. However, I want to introduce all of this content with a couple of clips.
So WorldWire is obviously pretty exciting. We've had lots of people approach us and mainly IBM about wanting to get on the WorldWire platform. We're super excited to have that become live.
I'm the VP of Blockchain, really the solutions portfolio for financial services at IBM, which is really the largest segment of IBM's market. Financial services represents about $30 billion a year revenue, about 40% of the overall client portfolio. Just a little bit of a commercial, get it out of the way really quick for my current employer. IBM's the global leader in enterprise blockchain today. We have over 1,500 professionals working across virtually all industries, 400 plus blockchain projects. We have the world's leading enterprise blockchain platform based on open source, governed by the Hyperledger project, differentiated by cloud, and infrastructure offerings like the Z systems and the Q quantum systems, which are coming soon.
In the world had a correspondent bank account with every other bank in the world, but that's just not realistic. That's not feasible, at least not until now. If everybody is using a distributed ledger, a shared ledger, we now have the capacity to represent bank balances on each other in one system. And that's really where the efficiencies come, as you eliminate these hops, these intermediaries, because now every bank conceptually has a relationship with every other bank in the world. So we built the system that envisions that ultimate outcome. We call that system WorldWire. So WorldWire is a network of networks that is built on top of the Stellar protocol, which provides a blockchain protocol that is tailored and tuned for the transfer of value and for the store of value through the issuance of many different types of digital assets.
Here is where we get into the specific information that I was provided and which I collaborated with the individual who provided it to prove out and actually show that XLM has been chosen as the primary public blockchain in the new global economy. And it all comes down to the UN's Pacific Office and APFII, which is the Advancement of Pacific Financial Infrastructure and Inclusion. If you go on that site, it calls out that it will include real-time payment and trade finance to over 110 countries, covering 2 million customers every month. And it includes creating national payment platforms for G77 economies, which is actually a total of 134 countries at this time. Continued growth of the regional real-time payment services within the Pacific, which include Vanuatu, Kiribati, the Solomons, Papua New Guinea, the Cook Islands, into Tonga, Fiji, and Vanuatu again, which I'm not sure about that one. It could be a typo. And it includes Vodafone as well, which has ties that go back into XLM. And here's where we are able to begin to trace everything back into XLM. ClickX, which is a founding member of APFII, trialed IBM's blockchain in 2017 and 2018. The partnership created the world's only multi-country blockchain-backed payment infrastructure to be run by prudentially supervised institutions and put almost 100% of GDP of the countries involved through its corridors over just a few short months. In 2019, IBM handed the platform back to ClickX, and WorldWire reverted to non-distributed systems, which is a different way to say that it was handed back to traditional financial institutions. And at about that time, Stronghold's exchange went to institutional only. And they, of course, have a ton of ties into IBM WorldWire. Now, here is where it gets pretty interesting. If you click on that link here, it takes you to an account that has 2.5 million payments that primarily took place between about March of 2021 and about January of 2022. And it has a lot of information on here. It has so much information that I was not even able to open it all up. I tried to export it as a CSV. I tried to open it up on every Explorer, and it all had the exact same problem, where I was only able to find about the 300 most recent transactions. I was able to export what I could, and using the average price in between March of 2021 and January of 2022, which was about 34 cents XLM, I was able to extrapolate that, where in that time span, it is estimated that they transacted about $5.4 billion. And I have a bunch of math here. It's not anything complex. I am just trying to extrapolate off of a tiny percentage of the total amount of transactions. And I have a couple of other interesting points. Off of my estimations, they went through about 75% of all of that was in circulation over that time period. And they were going through almost 11 million XLM every day and about $3.6 million every day. Now we get into Project Aspire. That is proud to be involved in bringing together 11 members with the intention of applying for a bank license in New Zealand. And if you expand that into how Stronghold has one of their offices over there, and how Sean, who is the chief technology officer, actually came from there, it begins to get a bit too coincidental. Project Aspire is a goal set by APFII members to prepare for and eventually apply to the Reserve Bank of New Zealand to become a full-service New Zealand bank, which goes back into a lot of comments that have come from Tammy Camp, who is the chief executive officer at Stronghold, that the company is pretty much a bank. And here it calls out some more involvement with a couple of points that I'll be tying in. In 2013, they got funding for regional expansion out of Swift. In 2015, they had a trade financing and invoicing system. In 2017 was the IBM partnership, and in 2018 you had the payments and payment services launch.
Plan accordingly. And the same thing goes for businesses too. In fact, it's even more areas that impacts the end user experience. There's a tipping point coming, and blockchain, in particular digital currencies, this notion of being able to have a monetary store of value that can move as easily as email, as information can move, is really kind of the next thing. Blockchain changes the dynamic in that you eliminate the need to have intermediaries. You're just dealing with the two end party actors. It's more point to point. So it reduces friction. If you have less stops along the way, you have less cost, less time. Ultimately, that translates into a better overall experience for the sender and for the recipient. Well, IBM WorldWire will be a new type of transactional payment network that enables money to move more seamlessly, more quickly, more cost effectively to anywhere in the world. It is a network at its very core, provides a means for counterparties, that is to say for financial institutions acting on behalf of their beneficiaries, to signal to one another that they want to send money for some reason, and to be able to do all of the due diligence that's required to make sure that the money being sent is not being sent from any nefarious actor, and likewise the recipient is a legitimate entity. The novelty of WorldWire is that payment message instructions and the store of value, the actual money, move together as a sequence set of operations in a single transaction on a single network. That's pretty profound because it's no longer about just making accounting entries. It's also about moving real monetary value in conjunction with those accounting entries. That's never happened before. That's something entirely new.
It also has a topic that I'll be covering in a couple of days, where they are trying to go public as well. And I have some more information on that. However, it is enough to where it can have its own piece of content. Here is the guy who is connected into all of this. Robert Bell comes out of HSBC, and he has been the guy behind the Pacific's 8-country real-time regional payment infrastructure since 2013, and he was awarded a New Zealander of Year in 2017, and that again ties back into Stronghold as well. And if you go back on the APFII site, he initially established ClickX to simplify international payments and pioneered the use of mobile apps and other emerging tech to provide convenient, low-cost, and accessible solutions to help Pacific communities with banking transactions. ClickX connects heavily into Swift as well, because in 2013, it was named the top startup at Swift's In a Tribe Challenge, and it all comes back into the same guy. Here on the stellar.org site, you've got IBM and ClickX choose Stellar to power the future of cross-border payments, and that was in October of 2017. And again, it ties into Robert Bell. And here it again calls out connections to IBM and how it is already processing live transactions in 12 currency corridors across Pacific Islands, Australia, New Zealand, and even in the UK. Here we have an old tweet talking about how XLM goes to work for the common man, which is probably how they want to appear at this point in time, but that is not exactly true. If the connections to IBM and ClickX weren't enough to impress, you've got Deloitte, Parkway Projects, and Tempo working with XLM as well. Here is a post on the UN and crypto from Tokenizer, who puts out a lot of great stuff, and it calls out things such as XDC, ALGO, Quant, HBAR, and XLM. It was utilized by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees during the initial peak of the war in Ukraine. And I have talked about it a couple of times in the past. However, it's interesting that all of the projects that tie into IBM are also tied into the UN as well. So in 2019, the World Economic Forum and UN joined into a partnership. And I wanted to call that out because of the involvement with the World Economic Forum that XLM has had and how it has only expanded, including the UNHCR pilot and how the SDF is a non-profit organization compared to Ripple, which is a private for-profit company at this time. It would make a lot more sense to put a non-profit company out there as a neutral entity so that you could create the financial infrastructure on it without giving it the appearance of favoritism of a private company. And all of that is on the World Economic Forum site. So in September of 2023, you've got an article on the SDF joins the World Economic Forum's Humanitarian and Resilience Investing Initiative to support the most vulnerable communities. And that is a common theme of what XLM is trying to do right now. They have gotten involved in a lot of these pilots that have allowed them to prove out how their own protocol is able to effectively handle these kinds of things. And after it is proven out, it then gets expanded and scaled up. Here is an image from the XX account about how the Ukraine pilot that involved Stellar and the UN and USDC and MoneyGram could look a lot like what the infrastructure required for the distribution of a CDC would be. And that pilot was not new to XLM. In 2021, they began to work with Ukraine to develop virtual assets and to facilitate CBDC infrastructure with Ukraine. Here is an article that is talking a lot about XLM, Ukraine, and the UN. However, it calls out global software company DCM, who is also Stellar, has developed a platform to issue tokenized deposits of the Ukrainian currency. And here is a bit more on that on their site. It talks a lot about Ukraine up here, and it explains how it would work. And if you're interested in tokenized deposits, I did a video on that with XRP as an example. However, it is the exact same thing here. It would just be XLM instead. And here it calls out online messaging between the Stellar network and bank accounting, and it's backed by the Stellar platform, and DCM facilitates integration of partner banks and financial institutions into the global financial network. Here is a bit more on the ties into the World Economic Forum. Here is the site of the Universal Digital Payment Network, which was launched at a World Economic Forum's Davos event. and it is all about payments across multiple CBDCs and regulated stablecoins. This right here comes from January of 2023 and it involves Deutsche Bank, HSBC, and Standard Chartered, which all have ties back into XLM as well as it coming out of the World Economic Forum. Here's a bit more on that, and it just explains a bit more on how it actually works. And in 2018, you've got Jed McCaleb explaining how blockchain could power a universal payments network. And it's hard to directly tie XLM into the UDPN other than XLM being connected into everyone involved. However, you've got PayPal USD is now integrated with the UDPN. And it's interesting that PayPal and FedNow have almost the exact color schemes, which also ties back into how XLM, XRP, and even SHX all tie back into the PayPal mafia and all of the individuals involved. And you've got McCaleb here. So a bit more on Swift, right? Here is an article from March of 2024, which is talking about a need for information in a shared ledger paradigm. And it, of course, does not directly call out XLM. However, it does talk about the IMF and the Regulated Liability Network. And the IMF has called XLM and XRP to be effectively stablecoins in the past, not because they are pegged to anything, but because of their near instantaneous transaction time. And an interesting thing to note about the Swift's involvement into XLM, which also ties back into the IMF, is that Robert Townsend, who is an advisor to, which is on our XLM graphic here, is also involved in the XT platform, which is a platform that allows banks and regulators to have an overview of everything happening on different ledgers that they connect to. And here we have a clip about the pilot for interoperability and connectivity to other CBDC platforms.
And so the challenge we've set ourselves at Swift in this context is to try and make this all work together. In other words, to make this diverse set of CBDCs work together with themselves and alongside existing payment systems, which will undoubtedly continue to exist for many, many years to come. And how do you actually join that up so that if I'm Nick in the UK and I have a digital pound, I can actually pay Dirk, who's maybe in the Eurozone and doesn't have a digital euro, right? How do you actually make that work? So we address this in a few ways, and I won't get to the detail of this slide, but I think the key thing to take away here is we need to create interoperability. Interoperability between these different forms of money and interoperability between the different technologies that support them. We work on this in three different ways. One is to get involved in industry initiatives, such as something called the Regulated Liabilities Network, or RLN, that you may have seen literature about. The second is that we join with the BIS and key central banks to experiment where they value our presence. And the third is that we initiate our own sets of experimentation to try and drive forward the collective knowledge of the industry. And last year we demonstrated a new experimental solution to be able to do what we call interlink CBDC networks. So on this diagram you see two different CBDC networks and a conventional payment system linked together at a technical level. This solution, we believe, is potentially powerful because it can allow a high level of automation and straight-through processing of a payment, but also it is highly scalable because through connecting once to Swift's platform, that would enable that domestic CBDC to be used for cross-border payments with any other payment system that's already connected to Swift. This, if you're familiar with the literature, is a demonstration of what the BIS calls the MCBDC Model 2, or interlinking a model. And in that sense is kind of a hub and spoke, similar architecturally to the BIS's recent project, Icebreaker.
In the next installment, I will talk about all of the technical ties in between XLM, IBM, WorldWire, and Hyperledger that also ties into things such as XDC, SHX, and Casper.